few years back, my then boyfriend and I, 22 female, were living in a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, about a mile away from the coveted Larimer Square and tourist favorite 16th Street. The location was fantastic, but with people-dense areas often comes trouble. We lived in a historic house with 4 townhouses next to one another. The layout is important to the story. All 4 front doors were aligned on a single porch. My apartment was located next to an alley and was the last door on the left. Due to a work obligation, my boyfriend was sent on a 3-month-long work assignment, leaving me alone in the house with our 2 dogs. Honestly, no sweat off my back. After growing up in a small town in the Northeast, I was eager to explore. My days after work were filled with long walks around the dog parks and exploring restaurants and craft breweries in downtown. All was well until it wasn't. Being alone most of the time and raised in a town of 4,000 of my cousins, exaggeration, but kinda not really. I was docile and trusting. The worst combination, I suppose. About a month into being alone in the city, I would come home to 3 men smoking outside of my door. The first encounter, I decided to keep walking and called a nearby friend to help me get into the house safely. I thought this was a one-time thing, but weeks later, the men continually showed up. It was routine. When I got home at 5 p.m., they were always there lighting up a cigarette, almost like they were waiting for me. I was finally at my wit's end, and I asked them if they lived there, and whether they could verify that with my landlord. None of them answered, and 2 proceeded to walk down the alley, but one remained stone cold, and standing his ground, continuing to smoke. I was upset, and I repeated the question, "Do you live here, and can you verify this?" He stared at me with dark, cold eyes and put his cigarette out on my door, only to brush my shoulder as he left my property. Safe to say, I was unnerved. I reached out to my boyfriend to let him know what happened, and he relayed the message to our landlady. A few days had gone by since my last encounter, and there were no signs of those men. I felt pretty good about myself finally. I had taken for granted being able to walk up to my apartment steps without being fearful. I had made it to Friday, and I decided to treat myself with a few drinks with local friends. I had become diligent about locking windows and doors. Being next to an alley made me feel extra vulnerable, and after my confrontation with the porch creeps, I was on edge. My night out was enjoyable, and after a few beers, I decided it was time to go home. Thankfully, a friend of mine insisted on making sure I got into my house safely. After all, he was the one who assisted me on a few occasions before. I arrived home and he walked me to my door, but upon arrival, my door was covered in ash and the porch floor in cigarette butts. He could see the fear on my face and offered to sleep on the couch to keep watch, but I told him I'll be fine on my own. I stayed up a bit longer, double-checking locks and pulling my blinds down. After about 20 minutes, I retreated to my bedroom, which faced my front door, being sure to keep the door ajar so my Rhodesian Ridgeback could be aware of anything happening outside my door. After a bit of Netflix, I finally dozed off. Until 3 a.m., when I woke to my dog growling. I was horrified. Something in me knew that tonight was the night they would be back. I got out of my bed slowly, trying to make as little sound as possible. I peered out my door and saw a single hand on the stained glass window, and a pair of eyes peering in. Sure enough, he was back. I had unfortunately left my kitchen lamp on, exposing my house to the outside world. And I knew if he saw me, it was game on. Slowly and quietly, I made my way to the lamp and turned it off so he could no longer see me, which ensued terror. The man, appearing to be shirtless and yelling slurs at me, began pounding on my door, demanding entrance. I retreated to my room and I called 911, who told me to stay low, avoid interaction, and to stay on the line until the officers arrived. I couldn't stand to watch him punching the window, because I knew it was a race between him and the officers, for whoever got me first. Finally, there was a loud crash. I peered through the door crack to see that he had upgraded from a hand to a brick, causing the glass to begin cracking. It had almost been 10 minutes on the phone with dispatch at this point, with officers 10 minutes away from my home. After a few more brick throws, I watched him scale the porch to my window, continuing to try and obliterate the glass, and then there was silence. I once again looked toward my front door to see him looking back at me, cigarette in hand, until the cops arrived. I was told to wait for a knock on my door, which finally came, to tell me it was safe to come out. I made it outside, just as they were putting him in the back of the vehicle, when he yelled, "Bye, Pete." This shook me to my core. Only my family referred to me as that, and they were thousands of miles away. I realized he had been watching and listening and waiting. He probably knew my boyfriend was gone, and most likely heard me refuse to have my friend stay there. I watched the vehicle drive away, and I called whoever I could get a hold of at this hour. Come morning, my mom finally called me back and told me to get in touch with officers and press charges. Something that entirely slipped my mind during the mayhem. I called them back and asked them to get the paperwork, only to be told that he was put in the hospital and ran off before properly identifying him. Needless to say, I moved shortly thereafter and my boyfriend found another job locally. To the cops who were absolutely no help, good riddance. And to the man who was after me for God knows what, I never want to see you again. This happened to me about 4 years ago. I was living with a roommate in an apartment complex in a bad area. It wasn't terrible exactly, but it was right by a busy road that seemed to attract a lot of crime. And it was surrounded by other crappy apartment complexes. The kind of place you, as a woman, wouldn't want to walk around at night, especially. I had subsequently been harassed almost every time. This was before I had a car, by the way. It was about 3 a.m. and my roomie was dead asleep. I was awake because who knows. I was in my room on the computer when I heard a knock at the door. It was literally just one knock, and I took off my headphones to make sure I heard correctly. After a few seconds of pausing, another knock came. Then it began a rhythm. Not your normal someone at the door wanting to see you quick knock, but a slow continuous one. Almost like a singular heartbeat. Instantly, I was alarmed, but I decided to just leave it alone. Wait and see if maybe it was some drunk who'd gotten confused and would decide to toddle off after a bit. A few minutes passed, and this knocking did not stop, and it never picked up or slowed down, just a continued slow rhythmic knocking. After some time, I heard the person try for the doorknob in the middle of the knocking. We lived on the 3rd floor. Instantly, I was fearing for my life. Without waking my roomie, I went out into the living room and shouted through the door. The knocking stopped. I decided to look out the people and see who it was, but there was nobody there. I know it sounds like a horror movie, but I saw literally nothing. At that point, I backed away, and after I did, the knocking resumed. My shouting had woken my roommate, who was now asking what the hell was going on. I told her some person was knocking at the door like this over and over, and they must have hidden around the side of the wall. When I went to look out the people, they were fucking with us. We called the police, and they arrived after about 10 minutes, which consisted of me and my roomie hiding in our bathroom, which had a lock fortunately, while this psycho kept doing that slow knock at the door. Once the cops showed up, we were safe to come out and have a look at who was doing this to us. It was a boy, probably no older than 18. They had him restrained and had taken a backpack off of him. Inside the backpack was a shocking amount of drugs and, even worse, a knife. I'd never seen this kid before, but we were told he literally lived right across the parking lot from us, in the exact same apartment complex. The kid wouldn't say what he was doing here, but the sight of the contents of that backpack sent deep chills through my body. I'm positive he was planning to use the drugs on us, possibly sexually assault us, and maybe even kill us. The kid was arrested and jailed for a while, not long enough in my opinion, but after he got released, I heard he ran away. He had been living with his dad at the apartments. I haven't heard anything about him since, but Rumi and I moved to a nicer area shortly after that incident. I seriously hope he gets locked up again for some minor crime, because it's clear he had every intent to victimize us that night, and I have no doubt that he'll try it again. I'll never forget the way he knocked at our door. It had filled me with a sense of dread I had never felt in my life. My now husband and I moved in together almost 4 years ago to a rather nice, albeit expensive apartment complex in a sort of nice part of town. We were on the 3rd floor with a large balcony that looks out into the courtyard in which other apartments in the complex are located. Basically, you can see the other balconies and living rooms of the other tenants and the open stairwells. A year went by without a hitch. My husband works at a bar, so he comes home late, while I usually make it home around 5. It is easy to get to any apartment doorway, as the complex is large and open with no security doors, except the door to the apartment. It started in August of 2016. I would be home after work chilling and watching TV, almost always around 9:30. A could hear someone come up the stairs. Things would be quiet, and all of a sudden, loud sharp knocks on my door. I did not move because it was startling, but eventually went to look at the people. There stood 3 people, all with black hoodies on, all seemingly staring at the people like they could see me. I didn't answer the door, and after a while they left. Cue a few weeks later, same time, but this incident. Footsteps and then loud hard bangs on the door that sent my cat flying to hide. I sat, frozen, but said to myself, maybe police? I made it to the peephole once again, this time staring out at one person, dark hoodie, male, white, and very, very gaunt with huge black eyes. Again, I didn't answer the door, and I grabbed a kitchen knife that I kept by my side until my husband came home. This continued for weeks, and once my husband was home, he proceeded to look out of the peephole, saw the same man, and screamed for him to leave, and he did. We called maintenance and the police, who both stated that they would do regular patrols, but nothing else, and suggested cameras. Everything stopped for a while, maybe 6 months, during the winter, which helped me be at ease because when all this was happening, I was having a very hard time sleeping and going out at night. However, I always assumed it was the same man when it started up again. The same loud bangs on the door would happen, but when I would look out of the peephole, no one was there. I then became horrified as I started to notice extinguished cigarette butts by the side of my door, like someone was standing and waiting. Again, I reported it. Security stepped up in the area, but I still didn't feel safe. I was hoping he would just stop, as I felt tortured in my own home. But as I realized 2 weeks ago, things could be much worse. At night, to go to bed, I would have to cross our eating area, which was right in front of our giant glass sliding door that led to our balcony. It was late at night, lights off in the apartment. As I walk by, I glance over and across the courtyard. I see the same man standing on the landing of the stairs across the way from the 2nd to the 3rd floor, staring at me, right at my balcony. Just standing there unmoved, facing in the direction of me. I went numb, heart racing, and chilled to the bone. I know he couldn't have seen me because the lights were off and the stairway had lights of its own, but I was still scared shitless. I called my husband, who rushed over, but the man had left. More reports to the front office, more promised security patrols. This same creepy dead-eyed man in the black hoodie continued to stand at the stairway landing, staring at my apartment. It has now been 2 weeks, and he does this every Friday. I am horrified, and I've been having awful nightmares about someone breaking in and strangling me in my sleep. I am 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment, and I was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment, and I sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor, and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walk in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, and jumped out of my window. My apartment is on the 1st floor, and I called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was during summer, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car, while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys, and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding out a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house. I was a mess, shivering and crying. Told me that the man stood outside of my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. So when I was around 7 years old, we moved into this big house that was split into 3 different apartments. It was a light blue shade, so everyone called it the Big Blue House. I had a sister a year younger as well. We lived in the upstairs apartment. There were 2 apartments on the ground floor. In the front apartment lived a couple with their teenage son, and my parents knew them very well, and had actually known them most of their life. They lived in the apartment for a long time, but the 3rd apartment is where people seem to come and go. I still remember a certain tenant who was a lady in her 40s that had a daughter around the age of 4 years old. She would scream at her daughter that it wasn't her fault. Her father decided to go be with a whore. So even at the age of 7, I knew this was very odd to tell such a young kid that her father is dating a whore. The little girl would even tell me sometimes, "My dad is with that whore again." But this story is about the tenant who moved in after she left. He was just a single guy in his 40s as well. He was very friendly though. Now, my mom was an addict and would take off for weeks at a time. My dad had to work full-time to care for us, so we were left alone often, if not with the teenager son of the couple who lived in the front apartment. He would babysit us sometimes, but half the time we took care of ourselves. I remember hanging out inside the apartment of the couple with the teenager often. My parents loved them and they were good people, and we hung out inside their apartment a lot. Well, sometimes when all of us kids and adults were there, they would invite the man next door to come over and hang out. The man carried a camera with him at all times, and he loved taking our photos. And since we were young girls, we loved having our photo taken. So he would take a ton of pictures of us in full view of the adults and tell us he would print them and give them to us when they were ready. I don't recall this man ever asking us to enter his apartment or take photos alone, but he was overly friendly and seemed to enjoy our photos a little too much. He would also photograph our older cousin, whom was a 16-year-old girl at the time. If I remember correctly, this lasted about a month. The next thing I know, my dad is telling me to never go into that guy's apartment or speak to him at all. After listening on the adults talk, I found out that someone entered his apartment, though I don't know if it was a landlord or a friend, and discovered that he was developing our photos and cutting our faces from them, and pasting our faces onto the bodies of naked girls. He had them plastered all over his walls. He moved out within days. I'll never forget hearing that, since I have no idea if the cops were called or whatever happened to the guy in the photos afterwards. So I don't even know if this creep may still have my childhood photographs somewhere. If anyone is interested, I'll ask my dad and see if I can get more info. I've never really brought it up to him before. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in a West Side neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was a 4th floor walk-up unit. Very typical low-budget Chicago rental, in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter to this story. Our building had a total of 12 units, mine and the 3 below me, and a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches, so you can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. This was the thing that saved all 3 of us, my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time, and it was a scary thing for me because I was being stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I always worried that something would tip him off and he'd start stalking me again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from that stalker ex from yet another new account. About a week after that, my car was broken into. The glove box was emptied and things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 in change in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money. I was on high alert at that point and very scared about the time I'd be alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation and felt that it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are very common in Chicago. It's happened to me like 15 times, and the police usually do the reports over the phone and don't even come to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently. My partner left for his tour, and I set up cameras and bought door braces for the front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up on my stress level. It meant that I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go blast her bowels 6 or 7 times a night. I had the distinct prickly crawling sensation of being watched when I would take her out, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. Her diarrhea lasted an unusually long time, like 4 days. I was going in and out of the main door a lot, feeling very scared, and I noticed that some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed, so the lock engaged. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive and said that he'd mention it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed that the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At about 8:30 a.m. that morning, my first floor neighbor's place was broken into. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and he left his door unlocked while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and a pair of boots, and left a filthy coat and pair of boots. Took his college diploma but left $500 in the same cabinet. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs, but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the first floor apartment, and a master key for the front door and the back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second floor neighbor said to go tell me about it because I have a stalker. So my metalhead neighbor came up to let me know what happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked to the front door. I jumped out of my skin but looked through the peephole, recognized him, and the 3 of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, maybe 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us, but thought nothing of it. Then we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment he could have been going to, and he had to walk past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. He was not my stalker and I did not recognize him, but his image is burned into my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white top sneakers, not the ones stolen from downstairs. His black coat was oversized and hanging off of his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took a cell phone and called someone as he slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in artificially slow motion, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored out of the alley. We didn't get the plates, but the cops said it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't any crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and has the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most was the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet, but about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was a ram for the door jamb and locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired, like it had been broken open before. It seems like they used the one master key to place their ram, get somebody at the back door to catch me if I tried to run out that way, and somebody else was going to come back around, since they only had one key, and they'd break in my front door and go forward with whatever they had planned. When we caught them before they could catch me unaware, they seemed to have aborted the plan. I suspect they had been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured that I was alone. It was pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home 30 minutes before all of this. I feel that we all could have been horribly injured or worse had we been trapped inside and they had gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it, except that my landlord refused to change the locks, but he did to agree let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago and now have added a younger dog I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights and wingnut neighbors. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We had made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and one of them would drive us home. We go out to our friend's apartment and have some fun, and around midnight, we decide it's time for us to head back. But when we ask to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. They all said that they were either too drunk or too high, so we eventually decided to just start walking back. We would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way back. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even get halfway there before a car slowly starts rolling up behind us. I was only 15 or 16 at the time, and I was very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned. But Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking faster, so we start walking faster. The car also picks up its pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk faster. So at this point, we start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us, and two of the passenger doors open and two men get out. Realizing at this point, there's no walking faster to get out of the situation, she instructs me to, run now. So she takes off running and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind a pickup truck, and for a minute, we hope and pray that we weren't spotted. This is where some of the details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, as there was only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicates that we're now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck just looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or a video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of gods, he gives up and decides to go back to the car with his friends. This was our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only like 30 seconds. We find the pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were hidden behind some fences and bushes, and we're anxiously waiting to see if they discover us. Their car pulls around to the pool house, and we're biting our nails, hoping they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away, and we realize we haven't been spotted. We were safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours and hours and hours. They weren't giving up on looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but now we needed to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys we went to hang out with. So short shorts and revealing tops. We found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled up under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls. We felt completely alone and hopeless. But finally, around 5 a.m., someone finally answered and said that they would pick us up, which was the best news I had heard in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex but can't find the pool house. The group of men is still constantly circling around, so there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is with a little detective work, figuring out what building they're facing and what's in front of them. Are there dumpsters nearby, etc. We figure out where they were at, so we make a run for it. We spot their car and hop in as fast as we can, saying, "Go, go, go." We tell them and our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We passed the group of men on the way out, and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back home around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak back in without my parents ever knowing we even left. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted and possibly killed, and who knows what else. So I'm thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up, but a big fuck you to the adult men we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially fuck you to the guys that intended to harm us. On a happier note, I'm now very diligent and aware of my surroundings because of this, and we washed the dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter.